Each of us has our own special gifts and talents. What a blessing when these gifts are presented to the entire community. Welcome to Let's Talk About It. I'm Dorothy Sturlaugson. My guest today is my friend Pamela Harr. Pamela, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
We've done this many, many times in the past, but never on location. So this is kind of exciting to explore all of the sculptures that you have presented to Glendive. Can we start maybe, Pam, with a little background on you and your beloved Harvey Ratty?
Well, we used to live in Bozeman and always dreamed of coming to Glendive and having a home here. And so back in the 1970s, we had a lot of shows here and almost moved here when we got married. But thought, well, we'll stick it out in Bozeman for a while. And then in 96, we finally just made up our minds to move here because we love this town.
And what was it about Glendive at that time that you loved?
Oh, I love the prairies, and there's just too many trees in Bozeman. You can't see the sunrise and the sunsets. It's just beautiful here.
So Harvey Ratty belonged to all of us as you. Did you sculpt together? Did you create things together, or did you kind of go your own paths?
Pretty much we went our own paths. Harvey did more of the wildlife and the cowboys and Indian sculptures, and I stuck pretty much to women and children and some religious things and whimsical things and like oil pumpers, some of those mechanical things.
So over the years, did you give each other advice? Was it you lived together, you worked together. Did you give each other advice on your work?
Well, I would advise Harvey and give him a critique, but if he got too serious about giving me a critique, he usually didn't get dinner. It was, but we almost always did just our own thing. And as a result of all that, we created many, many sculptures, probably over 2,000 different sculptures.
So in that number of sculptures, some of them have become life-size. Harvey had some commissions for some very special sculptures. What were those, Pam?
Well, he did the eagle sculptures for the U.S. Pentagon, and then several different corporations have asked him to do different sculptures. And the Angus Association also did had him do a series of sculptures, and they're all over the world also, in Russia, Australia, Canada, and many other places besides the United States.
What was the last one that he did before we lost him?
He did a pretty good size Angus bull for a commission that he had for a fellow in Texas that had just a perfect, beautiful bull.
And you have your own credentials. When did you start the life-size sculptures?
Well, we had an opportunity to do one life-size sculpture in Bozeman of a lion and a man, and we did work on that one together. It was of Gary Shockey, who is international president of Lions Club, and I worked on his features, and Harvey worked on the lion. And he also did a life-size bobcat for the airport in Bozeman. And since we'd moved to Glendive, we really hadn't done that many life-size pieces. Pretty much just the smaller works, and went to a lot of shows and sold those to make a living.
But now you have a collection of beautiful art gracing the streets and bridges in Glendive, and today we're going to take a look at those, Pam. One more thing, you are in the Cowgirl Hall of Fame. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, back in the 70s, I was interested in sculptures of pioneer women, and in fact, another artist said, "Well, sculptures of women don't really sell." And I thought, boy, I'm going to show them, because here was a niche of sculptures that hadn't really been done that much in the past. And I started researching these women, and I was just fascinated with the stories of them. And every time I did a sculpture of a pioneer woman, then I'd send my research to the Cowgirl Hall of Fame. And later in 1981, I was inducted into the Cowgirl Hall of Fame for my work on pioneering women.
And you continue to do that today. Let's take a look at your first sculpture here in Glendive by the Gazebo Park.
Okay.
We're here in our park in Glendive with our first statue. It's called The Price. Missionary Narcissa Whitman has been a dream of Pam's for many, many years. Pam, maybe you can tell us its inception, where you knew Narcissa from, studies and so forth, and then how you created this.
Thank you, Dorothy. I started the sculpture back in about 1974, and I had copies of her letters home to her family about when she lost her only child, Alice Whitman, and I just couldn't get that vision out of my mind. Her little girl was 2.5 years old and drowned in the river out near Walla Walla, Washington. And so I thought, I'm just going to get that sculpture out of my head and into clay. And as a result of that first sculpture of a pioneer woman, I changed my whole outlook about what was really important in art, that people should have a reaction, a feeling for art. It's not just to be happy and whimsical and a decoration. And I did the small sculpture of 24 and sold the edition out within a couple of years, and always have dreamed of doing this life size. And this is, I researched Narcissa and found a person who had found sketches of the Whitmans in Canada, and I corresponded with him and used those sketches for my model for her face and her clothing and that all those details of the times. And this was it took place in 1839, and there on the ground you can see a couple of cups of water. Her little girl went out to the river and to get a couple of cups of water on a Sunday afternoon when they were fixing dinner, and when they couldn't find her, they went out to look for her and found her floating in the river. And when she wrote home to her family, she talked about her loss and said, Thy will be done, not mine. And this really inspired me. And I still get tearful even after all these years.
So we're at Dawson County High School. The sculpture here that Pamela's created is called Waiting for the School Bus.
Right.
Maybe you could give us a little history on Waiting for the School Bus and how it came to be.
Well, in about 1981, Harvey and I were talking about a sculpture, a story about we were talking about a story about his little dog that used to wait for the school bus, and I thought that was such a cute idea to have the dog sitting there that I did a small sculpture of it. And it was one of our best-selling bronzes. People would laugh about that and tell me stories of their dog that had been faithful and waited for the kids to come home. And so anyway, as a result of the small one, I did a middle-sized version that we used to raise money for the Bozeman drug dogs. And the neighbor had her dog come over, and she was a model for the one sitting down, and I used the police dog for the Bozeman Police Department as a model for the second dog. And then I used my Rottweiler. She's kind of a rescue dog, and I used her. She was quite a character, so she's sitting here scratching. And after we moved to Bozeman, Glendive, my dream was to do this life size, and I just decided to get her done. And every day that I went by the high school, I could see this sculpture sitting here, and I decided to give it to the high school with their perfect spot to show it off.
Pamela, you have a huge following in Glendive, and this particular sculpture has night lighting, right? Can you tell us who arranged that and how it came to be?
Bruce Miller was instrumental in getting lighting on all of the sculptures in town, and it's just a wonderful thing. I never even thought about lighting. I just was focused on the sculpture itself.
We've moved a little bit further down Main Street. This location is when you're coming in off the interstate on Merrill Avenue. There's a Welcome to Glendive sign, and in front of it is this beautiful sculpture, a memorial to one of Glendive's fine citizens, Ty Millen. Pamela, let's talk a little bit about how this sculpture came about and what it represents.
I saw a memorial about Ty Millen after he passed away several years ago, and I contacted the family about doing a sculpture in his memory, and I worked with the Millen family, and we came up with the idea that would represent kind of the essence of his life and the things that he loved to do. The boy is holding a retrieving dummy, which is soft and it teaches the dog not to squish the bird when he's taught to retrieve. And so they thought up having a young boy and his pup, and the pup's name is Bella, which was Ty's dog. And then on the back, he's wearing his high school championship basketball shirt and with the names on it. And I also was able to use his actual shoes that he wore at the basketball tournaments, and I made a mold of them, and so they're cast in bronze also. And so it's really an authentic memory of Ty's, and I think that it was very fitting for introduction to Glendive and a welcome.
We are at the Eastern Montana Veterans Home here in Glendive. The sculpture behind us is called To the Color. This is Pamela's second sculpture of a soldier. The first one is in Fort Peck. Mm-hmm. Pamela, maybe you'd start talking about the Fort Peck one and then move into what we've got here in Glendive at our nursing home.
Okay. Gosh, it's been about 5 years or so ago. Harvey and I were asked to do a sculpture for the Veterans Memorial at Fort Peck. And I researched what's been done, and we came up with this idea of doing a bugler, which I hadn't seen in any veterans memorials around the country. And before we actually were able to get started, Harvey passed away, and but I continued to work on the idea and finished the sculpture for Fort Peck, and also did a flag-covered casket for the memorial there at Fort Peck. Well, then about a year later, I thought I'd approach the foundation for the Eastern Montana Veterans Home here in Glendive, and suggested that I could do a bugler that I changed a little bit from the one that was up at Fort Peck, but I did the same theme, and this is the result of that, and I'm really proud of that. And when I made the sculpture, I used Doc Aby's hands as a model, and he was here at the Veterans Home, and I came over with my clay and just copied his hands in clay. And Harvey always said that Doc had the biggest hands he'd ever seen, and I thought that's perfect because the sculpture itself is a little bit bigger than life size, so it was perfect.
Pamela's latest creation that she's given to the residents of Glendive, the community of Glendive, and those who travel through our community, is a vision that you had about the time we did our last interview, Pam, the children on the bridge. Talk about each of the different, right now you have girls, but you have boys coming up as well.
Yes, I had this vision of seeing the sculptures on the bridge, and I thought, who owns the bridge? And I called Mike Newton, and he checked with the Department of Transportation, and I had a great opportunity to visit with them, and they approved it. And then I went to the city council because they had to sign a encroachment permit. I learned a lot about what the city council has to do, and I'm amazed. And anyway, they approved it, and that gave me an opportunity to get to work on the themes. And since I had a restriction of not making them any higher than 3 feet tall, I chose to do children. And since there's 4 pedestals, I wanted to have 2 boys and 2 girls, and themes that kind of represented this part of the country. And so I did the little girl with the horse and the girl feeding a goose, which Harvey always had great goose stories, and so I wanted to work one of those into it. And then I decided to do a little boy playing a ukulele, and he's wearing a cowboy hat, and his little dog's sitting next to him, howling. And the 4th one that I decided to do was the boy holding a paddlefish. Just had to work a paddlefish into the 4 sculptures, and he has a cat sitting next to him. So I have 2 boys and 2 girls, and the boys are at the foundry now, and they'll soon be on the bridge as well. Well, I finally finished 2 of the pieces for the bridge, with 2 more to go. And I am so thankful to Mike Newton at Fisher Sand and Gravel and his crew. If it wasn't for Mike kind of clearing the path to get the okay from the Department of Transportation and the city, this wouldn't have been possible. And I have dreamed about this since I thought the whole idea up last February, and it's come together a lot faster than I even dreamed it'd be.
It's a blustery day here in eastern Montana. The wind has probably distorted our audio a little bit. The sun has gotten in the way on occasion, but it's been a marvelous time with you, Pam. I so appreciate you doing this for us. Let's talk about it. I'm Dorothy Sturlaugson with my dear friend Pamela Harr.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us.